Kathleen carried a vivid memory from a few months ago, a story that lingered in her mind, a testament to recognizing toxic behavior and the courage it takes to stand against it. At 31, she had built a life with her husband, Anthony, a man she had loved since their teenage years. They were high school sweethearts who, despite attending colleges in different states, never let distance weaken their bond. Their love endured, and this month marked their 13th year together. But there would be one conspicuous absence at their celebration: Anthony's mother, Carol. From the very beginning, Carol had never hidden her disdain for Kathleen. Having raised 2 sons, she had always indulged them, cherishing them as if no woman could ever be worthy of their affection. Her overbearing nature had long been evident, yet Anthony and his older brother, David, remained blind to the extent of her control. She forbade them from dating or socializing with girls outside of school, weaving a web of manipulation under the guise of maternal love. As the brothers grew older, the weight of Carol's dominance became too heavy to ignore. David was the first to rebel, standing his ground against her oppressive rules. His defiance led to heated conflicts, even threats, especially toward his then-girlfriend, Lauren, now his wife. Unlike Anthony, David saw Carol for who she truly was. He refused to bend to her will and, over time, distanced himself from her. But Anthony struggled to do the same. While he acknowledged David's actions, he believed his brother had taken things too far. Kathleen had been careful not to voice her concerns in the early days of their relationship, wary of stirring conflict. Little did she know that Carol would turn her full attention toward her, determined to tear their love apart. She orchestrated an extravagant Venice tour during prom week, ensuring that Kathleen and Anthony couldn't attend together. Despite Anthony's pleas to cancel the trip, it was the one time he had gone against his mother's wishes. Carol's interference didn't stop there. Each time she called Kathleen, it was a barrage of insults, a relentless attempt to make her feel unworthy. Yet Anthony remained silent, unwilling to stand up to his mother. When Kathleen and Anthony secured places in different colleges, Carol seized the opportunity, preying on Anthony's insecurities. She warned him that Kathleen would be unfaithful, planting seeds of doubt in his mind. The pressure became unbearable, leading to a brief separation. Carol reveled in their supposed breakup, but her celebration was short-lived. Anthony found his way back to Kathleen, a decision that sent Carol into a frenzy. Determined to regain control, she intensified her efforts. The harassment became relentless. Kathleen, exhausted by Carol's cruelty, finally confronted Anthony. "Your mother is constantly disrespecting me. I've tried to be friendly, I've tried to be welcoming, but all she does is tear me down. I'm tired of this, and you need to do something about it." Anthony dismissed her concerns with a sigh. "You know how my mom is, Kathleen. After what happened with David, she's just afraid of losing me too. She thinks she's looking out for my future. Don't take it to heart." Kathleen felt a surge of frustration. "So you're okay with how she treats me? She tried to break us up, Anthony. She played on your insecurities, and you let her." He hesitated but remained unconvinced. Carol, in his eyes, could do no wrong. Even David tried to reason with him, but Anthony saw his brother's defiance as betrayal. David eventually married Amy, his high school sweetheart, the very woman Carol had once tried to drive away. When the wedding invitations were sent, Carol's name was deliberately left off the list. Devastated, she turned to Anthony, pleading for him to intervene. A heated argument erupted between the brothers. At first, Anthony contemplated boycotting the wedding in solidarity with their mother, but Kathleen urged him to reconsider. "She tried to break them up, just like she tried to break us. Do you really think David and Amy would want her there? You need to respect their decision." The weight of her words settled over him, and after much deliberation, he chose to attend. But Carol's wrath was unforgiving. When Anthony returned, she wept on his shoulder, lamenting the betrayal. She demanded his presence for an entire month, and to Kathleen's dismay, he complied. Their planned trip to Colorado was cancelled so he could make amends with his mother. Watching him prioritize Carol's feelings over their own relationship was a devastating blow, but Kathleen held on to hope that he would one day see the truth. 3 years later, Anthony proposed. It should have been a moment of pure joy, but Carol's disapproval cast a shadow over their happiness. Though she feigned excitement for her son, Kathleen later learned that Carol had refused to give Anthony her engagement ring, convinced that Kathleen was a gold digger and that their marriage wouldn't last. But Kathleen needed nothing from Carol. The ring Anthony chose for her was a reflection of their independence, their success as engineers, and the life they had built together. The wedding planning, however, became a battlefield. Carol inserted herself into every detail, from the cake tasting to the venue selection. She scoffed at Kathleen's vintage theme, dismissing it as dull and tasteless. Every choice Kathleen made, Carol criticized. Frustrated, Kathleen turned to Anthony. "This is getting ridiculous. We're the ones getting married, and your mom needs to let us decide for ourselves. I don't need her input on everything. She hates every decision I make, and you need to tell her to back off." Anthony hesitated, torn between the two women in his life. But Kathleen knew this was the moment of truth. Would he stand by her side, or would he continue to live under his mother's rule? From the moment I became part of Anthony's life, his mother, Carol, made it clear that I was unwelcome. With 2 sons she had coddled and adored, she viewed no woman as worthy of them. Anthony and I, high school sweethearts, had defied the distance of attending separate colleges, keeping our bond strong. But Carol saw me as a threat, a disruption to the control she had carefully maintained over her family. Her tactics were relentless. During our teenage years, she went so far as to arrange an extravagant trip to Venice during prom week just to prevent us from attending together. It was one of the only times Anthony defied her, but it wasn't enough to make him see the full extent of her manipulation. Every time she called, her words were venomous, tearing me down, belittling me, branding me as unworthy of her son. And yet, Anthony remained passive, unwilling, or unable to stand up to her. Even as we matured, even as her behavior became more toxic, he excused it. When I confronted him, pleading for him to see how much she was hurting me, he dismissed my concerns. "She's just sensitive," he'd say. "She's afraid of losing me, like she lost David." But the truth was, Carol had never lost David. He had freed himself from her suffocating grasp. Years earlier, he had stood firm against her manipulations, refusing to let her dictate his relationship with his now wife, Lauren. His defiance led to bitter fights, emotional blackmail, and threats, but in the end, he had walked away, choosing love over control. Anthony, however, remained trapped in the fog of her influence. Even when David and Lauren married and chose to keep Carol out of the wedding, Anthony sympathized with her, nearly refusing to attend in protest. I had to reason with him, to show him that Carol's tears weren't born from love but from her own wounded pride. He relented, but the battle between his loyalty to her and his commitment to me continued. When Anthony finally proposed to me after years of dating, Carol's facade of happiness was paper-thin. She refused to give him the family engagement ring, convinced that I was nothing more than a gold digger. The irony stung. I had never wanted anything from her. Anthony and I were both successful engineers, financially independent. The last thing I needed was a token of her approval. Planning our wedding was a nightmare. Carol inserted herself into every decision, from the flowers to the cake, deeming my vintage theme boring and tacky. I tried to ignore her, but Anthony, desperate to keep the peace, made changes to appease her. I compromised where I could, but the wedding day itself proved how little respect she had for me. Carol arrived wearing an elaborate white lace gown, one that shimmered so brightly it could have passed for a bridal dress. Gasps rippled through the guests, but she feigned innocence. Anthony, for once, took action, insisting she change before the ceremony. My best friend, anticipating Carol's antics, had purchased a backup dress for her. Cornered and out of excuses, Carol begrudgingly changed. During the reception, she stole the microphone, delivering a tearful speech about how she was losing her sons to awful women. The discomfort in the room was palpable. Even her own relatives looked mortified. Once again, my maid of honor came to my rescue, swiftly redirecting the attention back to the celebration. But Carol wasn't finished. She called incessantly throughout our honeymoon, her voice dripping with manufactured sorrow. If Anthony didn't answer, she called me, accusing me of taking her son away from her, declaring that no matter what I did, he would always choose her over me. When I confronted her, Reminding her that we were on our honeymoon and deserved privacy, she turned vicious. "Kathleen, you're greedy," she spat. "All you care about is taking him away from me, draining him of his money." The accusation was laughable, considering Anthony had never financially supported me. I had my own thriving career. But she didn't care for facts, only for the power she was losing. Months later, when I discovered I was pregnant with our first child, I hesitated before agreeing to let Anthony share the news with Carol. Her reaction was exactly as I had feared. Instead of joy, she wept, accusing me of trapping Anthony, even suggesting that the baby wasn't his. For 3 weeks, her dramatic outbursts continued until, without warning, she arrived at our doorstep, gifts in hand, suddenly eager to play the role of the doting grandmother. Something about her change in demeanor unsettled me. That evening, she offered to make us tea, a seemingly kind gesture that Anthony readily accepted. But when I walked into the kitchen, I saw her pouring from 2 different cartons. One our usual oat milk, and the other something unfamiliar. My gut screamed at me to be cautious. When she handed me a mug, I switched it with Anthony's when she wasn't looking. Hours later, I woke to the sound of my husband retching violently in the bathroom. He was pale, trembling, doubled over in pain. Carol emerged, her face a mask of exaggerated worry, but as I stared at her, everything clicked into place. She had used cow's milk, knowing full well that Anthony was severely lactose intolerant. I rushed him to the hospital, my heart pounding. The doctors stabilized him, but when the truth came out, when Carol admitted what she had done, not for Anthony, but for me, his world shattered. He had spent his life believing she could do no wrong, and now he was faced with the undeniable proof that she had deliberately put his health at risk, just to get to me. The fog that had clouded his judgment for years finally lifted. Carol wept, pleaded, screamed, but Anthony didn't waver. He told her, with finality, that we were cutting her out of our lives. We changed the locks. We blocked her on every platform. When she tried to force her way into our home, we called the authorities. We filed for a restraining order, presenting security footage and the doctor's testimony as evidence. Even extended family, once sympathetic to her tears, turned their backs on her. Without our financial support, Carol was forced to get a job at Walmart, an outcome that further fueled her resentment. But we no longer cared. With Carol gone, the tension in our home lifted. Anthony and I found peace, our relationship stronger than ever. He mended his bond with David, who welcomed him back with open arms. Lauren and I, already close, became like sisters. As we prepared to welcome our child, one truth remained certain: Carol would never be part of our family again. She had spent years trying to control and break us. Now, she had lost everything. And we had finally won our freedom.